Hello, friends. I'm Dr. Jack Dempsey, American writer and historian, and the editor of this book, New English Canaan, by Thomas Morton of Merrymount. Happy May Day, Happy May Day 2024. It's 397 years since this maypole went up on Massachusetts Bay in present-day Quincy, and Thomas Morton staged the biggest frontier party, quasi-wedding, and ameliorative rituals to help both Native American people and his own scattered ilk to do better in America, to cooperate toward a community of compassion, respect, and joyfulness. Now, there are a lot of people who have not heard of Thomas Morton or his book, and there are reasons for that, which I'd like to present briefly about today. Let's hear the voice of this guy first, okay, just to see what is at stake. Here he is. In the month of June, Anno Salute 1624, it was my chance to arrive in parts of New England with 30 servants and provisions of all sorts fit for a plantation. And while our houses were building, I did endeavor to take a survey of the country. The more I looked, the more I liked it. And when I had more seriously considered of the beauty of the place with all her fair endowments, I did not think that in all the known world it could be paralleled. For so many goodly groves of trees, dainty, fine, round, rising hillocks, delicate, fair, large plains, sweet crystal fountains, and clear running streams that twine in fine meanders through the meads, making so sweet a murmuring noise to hear as would even lull the senses with delight of sleep. So pleasantly do they glide upon the pebble stones, jetting most jocundly where they do meet, and hand in hand run down to Neptune's court to pay the yearly tribute which they owe to him as sovereign lord of all the springs. Contained within the volume of the land fowls in abundance, fish in multitude, and discovered besides millions of turtle doves on the green boughs, which sat pecking of the full, ripe, pleasant grapes that were supported by the lusty trees, whose fruitful load did cause the arms to bend, with which here and there dispersed you might see lilies, and of the Daphnean tree, which made the land to me seem paradise. For in mine eye 'twas nature's masterpiece, her chiefest magazine of all, where lives her store. If this land be not rich, then is the whole world poor. Why isn't that passage on the first page of American literature and history books? Well, there are reasons. Because ideologues, filiopietists, as they were once called, ministers, college presidents, the original faculties of American colleges had to toe the line. They did not want Morton's example of cooperation, compassion, and peace to become the rule. They had instead in mind what the Pilgrims of Plymouth and the Puritans of Massachusett Bay had in mind, which was a racially divided, class bound expropriation of American wealth for their own benefit. If you don't think it's that simple, well, hope you'll stay tuned and find out. Another reason we don't hear about Morton is something he explained himself, and this is a quote. When they find any man like to prove an enemy of their church and state, the first precept in their politics is to defame the man at whom they aim. And then he is an holy Israelite who can spread that fame broadest, like butter upon a loaf, no matter how thin it will serve. Well, today, maybe I can show you how thin it was. And also, because I always like to make my May Day messages one of hope, I would like to share with you what some of those early critics of Thomas Morton have said in all their invective brutality towards the truth, and then to show you how opinion in the last 50 years or so of American historical scholarship has changed our estimate of Morton. Now, one of the big signs, for me at least, of the attitude changing is this. This is a proclamation from the governor of Massachusetts, then 2011, Governor Deval Patrick, who published this proclamation of May 1st as Thomas Morton Day, in Massachusetts at least. And if I read to you its short statement, you'll have an idea of the curve of Morton's life and his achievements. A proclamation from His Excellency Governor Deval L. Patrick. Whereas Thomas Morton was born in Devon, England around 1576 and became the first English person to settle and build a plantation at Mount Wollaston in Quincy on Massachusetts Bay in 1624. And whereas Thomas Morton's respectful relationships with Native Americans made his plantation, called Merrymount or Merrymount, the most prosperous trading post of its time and place. And whereas Thomas Morton's intrepid explorations of Massachusetts and New England produced a detailed portrait of Native American cultures and of America's rich and beautiful natural endowments, and whereas Thomas Morton, his company, and, quote, all comers erected a maypole on May Day 1627 at Merrymount to celebrate their intercultural prosperity with a traditional English revel, and whereas Thomas Morton wrote and affixed his poem and song to the maypole to propose annual revels that would facilitate respect, cooperation, and prosperity on the New England frontier, and therefore some believe he may be America's first poet in English, and whereas the 1637 book about his observations and experiences, New English Canaan, represents an invaluable first chapter of American history, I, therefore, Governor Deval L. Patrick, Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, do hereby proclaim May 1st to be Thomas Morton Day. So there is a return of a sense of hope for all of us in what has happened with this man. And I think it's important to keep in mind as we go forward in this time of protests against free speech, the treatment of the earth, the war state that resulted from the Pilgrims and Puritans in America that we are still trying to change back. This man was vilified from top to bottom down 300 years of American letters. They called him America's first rascal. And in fact, he was a man of culture of that time. The Puritans and the Pilgrims were the counterculturalists. They thought that all you needed to understand the world and all time and all history and all human endeavor was the Bible. That's their words, not mine. So I want to share with you some of the virtually comic rejections and insults for Thomas Morton, and then to share a few of the more recent re-estimates of Morton's character and his achievements. Here's a first one from Nathaniel Morton in a book called New England's Memorial of 1669. Nathaniel Morton was the nephew of the first governor of Plymouth, William Bradford. And when he wrote this hagiographic filiopietist estimate of our, quote, founding fathers, well, this is what he had to say about Thomas Morton. His book is full of inveterate resentment against the New England plantations and their leaders. His book is very rarely to be met with. We know about one copy in this country. That part of the book which relates to the Plymouth planters is full of invective and misrepresentation, calculated to gain a degree of indulgence, however, with some readers, from the air of pleasantry which he adopts. He abounds in the vulgar wit of nicknames. Captain Miles Standish he calls Captain Shrimp. Captain John Endicott of Salem is styled Captain Littleworth. Mr. Fuller is Dr. Naughty. It is not known, nor will it be thought worthwhile to inquire who are intended by the appellations of Innocence Faircloth, Matthias Charter Party, and Master Bubble. But if you go to either ancientlights.org or Jack Dempsey Writer at wordpress.com, you can find out who all those people were and why they deserved Morton's appellations for them. A man named John Stetson Barry was one of the next in 1855 with his The History of Massachusetts to deliver one of the most amusing, because it's so savage and completely wrong, estimates of Thomas Morton. Listen to what he has to say. The work of Morton is a singular performance. That part of it relating to the customs of the Indians and the natural history of the country is interesting and valuable, but the rest abounds in low wit, and that species of lampoonery better befitting a denizen of Billingsgate Prison than a champion of the, quote, honor and dignity of the Episcopal Church. His seasoning may be relished by some for its coarseness, but it lacks the true Attic flavor. and is but a miserable attempt to imitate the most execrable and disgusting of the classic authors, with whose scurrility, buffoonery, and mendacity he fully sympathized. Were the whole work like a few of its chapters, it would add much to its character and to the fame of its author, as a more favorable estimate of his moral qualities would be warranted, were not the lack of these qualities so striking and palpable even by his own showing. So, as one other person, B.F. DaCosta, in 1882, finally began a kind of a return of Morton's estimate, he said, "It's been considered well nigh a proof of loyalty to treat his memory with scorn. Loyalty to the nascent American empire, that is, which was beginning to exterminate Native American people, beginning only 10 years to the month of Thomas Morton's Revels in May 1637, when they launched a exterminatory war against the Pequots and lost it in I can only call it a hilarious fashion, because they had no idea about the landscape, American Native people's political affiliations. They did not even know how to get to the target that they were hoping in which to entrap Native people and massacre them. It was a fiasco. And at ancientlights.org, there's a book there called Mystic Fiasco, and you can trace step by step how they got it so wrong by following the Bible. Here is Samuel Eliot Morison, the distinguished 1930 writer of Builders of the Bay Colony. Morton was a gay gentleman with an eye for trade, author of the most entertaining book on early Massachusetts, which very naturally played in with the enemies of the Massachusetts colony and posed before Bishop Love's committee of the Privy Council as an Anglican martyr to Puritan spite. One would wish that the authorities had not struck an enemy when he was down, but that was the way things were done in the 17th century. We are heavily indebted to Morton for the jolliest contemporary account of early New England. If he did not love our people, he at least loved our land. Those of us who spend our summers in the less frequented portions of the New England coast have probably met more spiritual descendants of Thomas Morton than of John Winthrop. I feel from a quote like that at least some kind of reality is beginning to leak into their opinions. They want to reject and curse this man outright, but somehow a trace loyalty of a thing called reality keeps creeping in. Here's Charles Francis Adams, Jr. of the great Adams family, who made himself editor of the 1882 edition of New English Canaan, the only one that came out from the time of its original publication until today with the book I just showed you. Excuse me. And this is what Adams, the thoroughgoing editor, had to say. Absolutely nothing to be said in his favor. A lawless, reckless, amoral adventurer, a born bohemian and reckless libertine without either morals or religion, saturated with revelry and scoffing, an amusing old debauchee and tippler. That his moral character was decidedly loose is apparent from his own statements. Yet, withal, he was a close observer. The man had, in fact, an innate love of nature and an Englishman's passion for field sports. What, except love of adventure, ever originally brought him to New England is not likely to be known. But once he got there, he was never able to take himself off, nor could others drive him away. You see what I mean? A little bit of reality leaks in even while they're heaping scorn on this man that they pretend to study in a quasi-objective fashion. So, William Carlos Williams, 1933, a wonderful American book called In the American Grain, his essays on different chapters of American history. And he was not afraid to go into Morton's case. And he said, "It's not so much good history to present Morton with sly amusement in mortal and unmannerly combat with his betters, as it would be to relieve him from that imposition of his time and seriously to show up that lightness, his essential character, which discloses the Puritans themselves as maimed to their advantage for survival, the converse of which, in a crooked way, perhaps, but in a way, Morton presented. Maimed for survival. In other words, they were so damaged inside that they were willing to be as ruthless as you could imagine to achieve their aims. That was not something that Morton subscribed to. So we're beginning to recover the man. It's a little bit hopeful to see that people are beginning to change their minds. George F. Willis in 1945, a book called Saints and Strangers. New English Canaan, one of the liveliest, wittiest, and most informative books of the day, though it is not to be taken too literally, for it obviously is a satire. Most solemn historians are simply stupid in dismissing the book as worthless. There we are. The American Heritage Encyclopedia, 1963. Colonizing was supposed to be a serious business. I guess Morton didn't exactly subscribe to that. L.S. Davidson Jr., a 1964 novel called The Disturber. I'd be damned if I could understand his nonsense, try as I would. It sounded brave, but it made no sense. Well, I think there's lots of surprises for a gentleman like that. And this comes from a friend of mine, Lance Carden, excellent writer, in his unpublished play, Thomas Morton in the Promised Land, an historical play for an unhistorical generation, 1971. This is a dialogue as Morton sits for the last time in a Boston jail to the breaking of his health, and supposedly Governor John Winthrop comes to visit him. Here's what they have to say to each other. Governor Winthrop to Morton in his 1645 Boston jail cell. The future. You will be known as a prodigal and licentious gun runner who introduced the savages to firearms, erected a maypole to the devil, and spread mutiny and drunkenness throughout the countryside. That will be your role in history. Morton. Then your history is a myth of ironclad black and white alternatives, full of the limitations and fictions of your own minds. When men regain a true sense of themselves, they'll cease to believe in the bloody alternatives of your history. A new consciousness will arise from man's experience on this continent. It's in the forest and in the Indian village, and it can't be hidden. Freedom is man's natural state. Winthrop says, I shall see if I can arrange for your release and banishment from the colony. You are old and mad. Morton replies, my madness feeds on the atmosphere of this cell, which you call Massachusetts. Pretty good stuff. Okay. Now the opinions, as of about the 1970s, start to really shift. This is Richard Slotkin, 1973, in a wonderful book called Regeneration Through Violence, Mythology of the American Frontier, 1600 to 1860. Morton regarded his own colony of Merrymount as the fountainhead of that erotic energy to which all the new and old worlds might have recourse. The Englishman must withhold nothing of himself from the wilderness and the Indian, but merge thoroughly with them and refresh himself at the sources of human passion and affection. That's exactly what Thomas Morton had in mind and articulated brilliantly in his poem and his song and his entire book. And he kept coming at it from different angles. First, New English Canaan is 3 books, as it were, 20 odd chapters about the Native Americans and their incredibly happy existence on the land before the English had touched them. 10 chapters on the natural endowments of the country and the many ways that it entrances with its beauty and can make everybody very comfortable and rich. And then 20 more odd chapters in book 3 of what I've been calling a manual on how not to colonize. He anatomizes all the different mistakes that the Pilgrims and Puritans willfully made in their effort to subjugate the Indians and take their wealth. And it's simply a Keystone Cops exercise in satire, because that was the only response Morton could find to say, this is so foolish, so needless, so unnecessary for us all to do well here. What you might say is, what is wrong with you people? So, excuse me, here we go with 1974's Robert D. Arner in an article called Pastoral Celebration and Satire in Thomas Morton's New English Canaan. And I think it has some important things to say to us if we are looking for hope in this late year. According to one contemporary theologian, Harvey Cox, for whom the rituals of release and clarification are not simply useful terms to describe the effects of festive comedy, but fundamental psychic necessities. Protestantism, with its emphasis upon man as an historical creature and upon life as a serious business, is especially culpable of divorcing modern man from his festive historical self and of the psychic dislocation consequent upon that separation. Thus, the Puritan invasion of Merrymount may mark a far more important turning point in American cultural attitudes than nearly anybody, Hawthorne is the possible exception, seems to have suspected to date. Moreover, Morton's deepest message, which I read in terms of release and clarification, that is, a heightened awareness of man's festive identity and his relationship to nature, is inherent in his book's form no less than in the overt attacks upon the Puritans. He seems a legendary embodiment of the fresh, green beast of the New World, and he continues to speak eloquently to us of a remote time in our infancy when things seem to have a chance to go another way. Right there, now you begin to understand why they had to demonize Morton from the ground floor of American letters. He offered a different way. They didn't like it at all. And there you go. So if you want to go along with, let's say, Thomas Prybeck in 1985, The Conquest of Canaan and Suppression of Merrymount, he says ultimately the most abominable quality of worship of the fertility gods was the absence of moral purpose. I would challenge that by simply trying to define what we mean by fertility, fertility gods, fertility cults. That's how they dismiss any kind of non Christian religion. But what does it really mean? It means a body of beliefs, practices, knowledges that enhance and facilitate the life of many healthy children. Fertility means having lots of children and celebrating the values that facilitate that. So here's Philip Howard Gray. Thomas Morton is America's first behavioral observer, 1987. Morton was an eager observer and cataloger of the animals of the woods, skies, and sea, although never mentioned, so far as I know, by a historical fraternity which otherwise endeavors to find America's earliest psychological observer. The date for such an honor has been moving steadily backward, but would it appear to be difficult to find an earlier visitor to American shores who saw so much and described what he saw with such cogent wit. As often happens, once the name of a person out of tune with the sentiment of the times is blackened, the historians, rather than doing their own investigating, merely repeat canards. That historical analysis may be shaped by the scholar's ethnic and genealogical centrality or isolation, is a truth which scientists may recognize long before historians do. There you go. The lack of an attempt to be objective about Morton has skewed American letters to bless empire for generations. It has misled us into bloodbath after bloodbath, and Morton wanted to cut that off right at the root to say, let's get some common sense here. Let's figure out what we're doing and how we can all do better. But they were not going to allow that. So I want to wrap up by just sharing the reaction that I got from American publishers. I paid myself to get this book out in front of American audiences. And after that, a publisher came running when they smelled the money moving to say, let's do it properly. But you know, a funny thing, there have been a number of positive reviews, even, well, very laudatory reviews of this edition of Morton's book. And yet they always add at the end, well, I'm not sure it's a good thing that Morton's reputation is being revived. He doesn't seem to have had any morals or religion that he took seriously and so forth, as if those things were needed to be a human being, which is first and foremost what Morton was. Dear Mr. Dempsey, say the editorial directors of many publishers, first of all, my apologies for having held on to this for so long, and thank you for having sent it. The Canaan is a fascinating work and of undeniable historical interest. I also agree that to present it appropriately would require substantial critical annotations and appendices. Unfortunately, it's also this aspect of the book that makes it a difficult project for us. In any case, I do wish you all success. It very much deserves to be made available. Oh, gee, thanks. Okay. Along the way, here's a reader's report from the Professional Journal of American Literature in 1996. Some interesting points. The evidence of Morton's awareness of the plague's effect upon Native Americans is significant, but I'm not sure about the rest. In his offer of help, supposedly, Morton turns out to be more than the mere cavalier pleasure seeker we think he was. Or does he? Of the myriad poetic allusions, one is curiously missing, an allusion to Marlowe. Morton and crew may be little more than a lot of passionate shepherds who dance and sing for thy delight each May morning. Perhaps the poem is Morton's answer to Raleigh's answer to Marlowe. But even without resorting to Marlowe, we can find a contradiction. Good work, kid. Attaboy. And one other, a reader's report from the MLA Journal, the state-of-the-art journal that examines American literary issues. This work suggests that the editor's sentimental favorite, Thomas Morton, is to wear the laurel crown of America's first poet in English. The criterion is, however, that he or she must have been an English-speaking and writing individual who had physical contact with the North American landmass and who wrote something in verse that focuses on the experience. But this rather pedestrian requirement doesn't jive well with the elaborate modern scholastic debates about poesy in general. Poesy? If you say poesy again, I'm going to hunt you down. Okay. That's all I wanted to add about this. So I want to wish you a very happy May Day. Drink and be merry with your friends. Raise a maypole and dance around it. The community, and it should be Quincy, Mass, let's be honest, but the community that adopts Morton's Revels as an annual event to facilitate having a good time, people meeting each other, trade, business exchange, entertainment, laughter, joy, memory in our tradition. The community that claims Morton's Revels will have, therefore, the oldest civic festival in the United States of America. 398 years from this year, it predates anything else we might consider even comparable. So once again, I wish you to drink and be merry, be proud of our growth as an American society. It's still going on. And take heart that a man as vilified from the beginning as Thomas Morton is beginning to see the sun shine again on his face and on his work. Take hope, my friends. Drink and be merry, and God bless you all. Thank you for watching.